Hey, so we're in chapter 27 of Isaiah, and it's a short chapter. We're going to go ahead and knock this out because we're going to do some more chapters after 27. They're going to be in a row, okay, because they're short as well. Um, and once we get to chapter 40, things really start to change, and it really gets messianic. And so chapter 39 kind of sums up um, this part of Isaiah, and then chapter 40, it all changes. So some scholars try to say that there are two Isaiahs, um, and we know from scripture that that is not true. John actually quotes Isaiah, and he quotes two from the first part and the second part, and we'll go over that. But that is how we know that there is one Isaiah, and he wrote the whole book. So, with that being said, there is in the whole Bible, okay, there's 66 books. The first 39 is Old Testament, and Isaiah is kind of set up the same way. So in the book of Isaiah, there's 66 chapters, and the first 39 are pretty much Old Testament-y, all right? And then from 40 on, they kind of get like New Testament, really messianic. So things really start to get exciting in chapter 40. So we're going to hurry up and kind of knock these out here and get on with it. So okay, the deliverance of Israel is what we're going to be talking about here in chapter 27. All right. So verse 1: In that day the Lord will punish with his sword, his fierce, great, and powerful sword, Leviathan, the gliding serpent, Leviathan, the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea. All right. So Leviathan, um, the monster of the sea, we know that's our first clue. It's Satan. We know from the book of Revelation he comes out of the sea. Also, Leviathan shows up in Psalm 74:14. He also shows up in Psalm 104:26, and he also shows up in Job. Okay, so Leviathan is Satan, and God's going to punish him. So we're talking about restoration of Israel here. Okay, verse 2. In that day, sing about a fruitful vineyard. Verse 3: I, the Lord, watch over it. I water it continually. I guard it day and night so that no one may harm it. Okay, so God is talking about tending to Israel here, watering it, protecting his vineyard. And if you remember from chapter 5 of Isaiah, the idiom for Israel is the vineyard, and the fig was the idiom for Judah. So I think collectively he's probably talking about the entire thing here, but just as a note, okay, God is going to be taking care of his vineyard. He's going to tend to it, water it, nurture it day and night. So we're starting to see this prophecy fulfilled. And so after about 70 AD, when Jerusalem was decimated, it was a wasteland. It was swamp and desert, either or. From some pretty early on photography, you can see Israel from like the early 1900s, and it was desolate. It was a wasteland, okay? So, but now Israel is blossoming and budding and filling the earth with fruit, like we're going to see in this next verse, okay? So, all right, we'll start about, I'll read 3 again. Sing about a fruitful vineyard. I, the Lord, watch over it. I water it continually. I guard it day and night so that no one may harm it. Verse 4: I am not angry. If only there were briars and thorns confronting me, I would march against them in battle. I would set them all on fire, or else let them come to me for refuge. Let them make peace with me. Yes, let them make peace with me. Verse 6: In the days to come, Jacob will take root. Israel will bud and blossom and fill the world with fruit. Okay, this is how we are starting to see this prophecy fulfilled, because Israel does provide the earth with fruit, so, and flowers for that fact. So Israel is now the third largest exporter of fruit in the entire world. And at one time before 1948, before they were made a nation again, they were desolate, and they had been that way for centuries after 70 AD when they were destroyed. So this prophecy that Isaiah is mentioning here, but now Israel is blossoming and budding, that's we're starting to see the fulfillment of that. So, so just on a note, they are the third largest exporter of fruit, and they mainly provide to Europe, but in the world, and they are smaller than the state of California. Israel's smaller than the state of California. So, all right. It's not just fruit, like I said, it's flowers too. So there's these big jumbo jets that leave out of Tel Aviv every night that are loaded down with flowers and fruit, and they supply Europe all year round with fresh flowers and fruit. So the flowers are grown year round in the Jordan Valley, and so if you go to Europe and you see fresh flowers and fruit in these shops, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them come from Israel. So um, in verse 6, and it talks about, I talk about in my notes here that if you fly over Israel now and you look at it, apparently, like you can see the cultivation of it. It's green, there's trees, orchards, and farmland. So, and then if you look east of the Jordan, it's still desert and desolate. So that's what it used to look like before. So God is really making that happen. All right, verse 7. Has the Lord struck her? He has struck down those who struck her. Has she been killed, as those were killed who killed her? By warfare and exile you contend with her. With his fierce blast he drives her out, as on a day the east wind blows. By this then will Jacob's guilt be atoned for, and this will be the full fruit of the removal of his sin. When he makes all the altar stones to be like limestone, crushed to pieces, no Asherah poles or incense altars will be left standing. The fortified city stands desolate, an abandoned settlement forsaken like the wilderness. There the calves graze, there they lie down, they strip its branches bare. When its twigs are dry, they are broken off, and women come and make fires with them. For this is a people without understanding, so their Maker has no compassion on them, and their Creator shows them no favor. Okay, so this talks about the barrenness of the desolation of how the land and how it used to be. This used to be Israel, and that did happen. Okay, so it was destroyed, it was desolate, the cities were laid waste until 1948. So he's given a comparison here. But now, like I said, we're starting to see the prophecy fulfilled of Isaiah, where it's budding and blossoming again and providing the earth, the world, with fruit. All right, so 12 and 13, God is going to talk about here about regathering his people back to the land. So in that day, the Lord will thresh from will thresh from the flowing Euphrates to the Wadi of Egypt, Wadi, and you, Israel, will be gathered up one by one. And in that day, a great trumpet will sound. Those who were perishing in Assyria and those who were exiled in Egypt will come and worship the Lord on the holy mountain in Jerusalem. All right, and this is a reference here to what we talked about before about Assyria and Egypt and Israel all coming together as like a trio in the end, and they will all worship God together. So here, when it talks about the trumpet, in that day, the Lord will thresh from the following Euphrates, the Wadi of Egypt, and you, Israel, will be gathered up one by one, and in that day a great trumpet will sound. Okay, so the trumpet that we're talking about here is the same trumpet from Joel, the second chapter, 15. I think it's verses 15 and 16. So actually, I'm just going to jump over there real quick and read it. So, because it's pretty interesting. Okay, so Joel 2, verse 15, blow the trumpet in Zion, declare a holy fast, call a sacred assembly, gather the people, consecrate the assembly, bring together the elders, gather the children, those nursing at the breast, let the bridegroom leave his room and the bride her chamber. Okay, that's 15 and 16. What's interesting about this is the sacred holy assembly. So it's speaking of the Feast of Tabernacles. All right, so this is what the trumpet's about. that's why there is so much prophetic interest in the trumpets. Okay, so interesting enough, we see here that it says in verse 16 that the bridegroom leaves his room and the bride leaves her chamber. So who's the bridegroom? It's Jesus, and the bride is who? Us, the church. And it says the bride is leaving her chamber. Okay, that could be a reference to the rapture. All right, the last trump. Okay, so um, when the trumpet sounds, the feast of tabernacles, or is called Rosh Hashanah. That is a fall feast. Okay, so just interesting that that's the same trumpet that we're talking about here, and he brings it up in these chapters. Like I said, 27 was supposed to be part of 26, and so they are called the Little Apocalypse. All right, so just interesting that it gets brought up here. So some people speculate that the rapture, they think the rapture will happen in the fall at the Feast of Trumpets. And if you've ever studied the Jewish feast, it would make sense. It really would. So I've heard people in particular say that they think that when Christ came back the first time, he fulfilled the spring feast, so that they think when the second time he comes back, he will fulfill the fall feast. But obviously, we don't know. Um, so there's a lot of argument that they could be that he could come back in the spring. So we don't know. I just think it's interesting, and I just wanted to point it out that the same trump that he's talking about in the last verse of chapter 27 is the same trump that Joel 2 talks about. So, all right, so that finishes up chapter 27 of Isaiah, and then we'll collectively do like the next 3 or 4 together, and then we're just going to start knocking these out until we get to chapter 40. Okay, so see you next time.